Chapter 8. Transmission of polling station results.
Transportation of electoral material, equipment, and handover to the ward elections officer.
Can you explain to us what happens after polling is finished and the polling station results have been finalized?
Certainly. The presiding officer must personally ensure to a secure transportation of all electoral material and equipment, both used and unused, to his or her ward collation center. During transporting the goods from the polling station, the presiding officer must be accompanied all the way to the ward collation center by at least one polling station staff and 2 police officers. However, in the case where it is not possible to transport all the materials and equipment at the time, then one police officer is required to remain behind in order to secure any such items left behind at the polling site. For example, tents, polling booths, etc. In such a case, only one police officer needs to accompany the presiding officer. Election agents are permitted to accompany them if space permits, but each one must have completed the indemnity form. Alternatively, they may follow by arranging their own transportation. These election agents must keep their election agent badges so that they may be permitted to enter the ward collation center. The sealed ballot boxes and the sealed envelopes with the V11 forms and other material must not be opened along the way. Under ordinary circumstances, the ballot boxes may only be opened if a recount is ordered by either the Electoral Court or the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. In such an event, only the specific ballot boxes specified in that order are to be opened under the terms specified in Section 67A of the Electoral Act.
8.2. Electoral staff at ward collation center. Can you tell us which electoral staff are on duty at the ward collation center and what are their roles?
Certainly. Typically, each ward collation center is serviced by 4 electoral staff, namely 1 ward elections officer known as the WEO, 1 deputy ward elections officer known as the DWEO, and
2 clerks.
This is over and above the police officers assigned to provide security on site. Clerks. The clerks will complete the following activities with every presiding officer and one of his or her polling station staff. Receive and check that all the required original V11 forms have been duly completed and signed. The clerk must also verify that all writing on the forms is clearly legible and that all calculations have been correctly completed, receiving and signing off for the return of electoral material and equipment. In a few cases, some material such as tents may have been left behind at the polling station. This should be noted and arrangements should be made by the presiding officer together with the ward elections officer for their return to the constituency command center or the provincial elections office as may be applicable. Ward elections officer, WEO. The ward elections officer is overallly in charge of ensuring the correct administration of all elections in his or her ward. The WEO will make use of one of the original V11 forms for each polling station to complete an entry on the V23A form. For each polling station in that ward, there must be one corresponding original V11 form attached to the back of the V23A form. Under no circumstances is the WEO permitted to complete an entry for any polling station on the V23A form without
having or handing original V11 forms.
The Deputy Ward Elections Officer, also known as DWEO. The DWEO will assist the WEO in completing his or her duties. In the unforeseen event where the WEO is taken ill, this must be immediately reported to the Constituency Elections Officer. The Constituency Elections Officer will note this down and authorize the DWEO to serve in the role of WEO.
The DWEO is responsible for filling in Form PE 2005/32B, Gender Participation Form, based on the Form PE 2005/32A received from each polling station.
In the event where the WEO and DWEO have free time on their hands, then they may assist the clerks with completing their duties so as to ensure that all activities are completed as timelessly as possible. In the case of wards with a small number of polling stations, the above-mentioned number of electoral staff may be reduced. For example, the 2 clerks may not be required if the WEO and the DWEO are able to fulfill those functions on their own.
8.3. Handover procedure from the presiding officer to the ward elections officer, WEO. Can you now walk us through the handover procedure step by step at the ward's collation center?
Certainly. When receiving the goods, the clerk will only open the envelope with the original V11 forms, as the WEO will require the original V11 forms to complete the V23A, also called the ward collation form. Note that the clerk must also ensure that the required number of original V11 forms have been handed over by the presiding officer for each and every concurrent election. Photocopies, facsimiles, or anything other than the original V11 forms will not be accepted. The clerk will then verify that each original V11 form has been correctly filled in and all original forms show precisely the same information.
All the information on every form is clearly legible and
check that all forms have been duly signed by the presiding officer and all other relevant stakeholders. If any errors have been detected by the clerk, the WEO or
the
DWEO must be called over, and any errors must be addressed by the presiding officer and his assistant. The corrected document must be signed off by the presiding officer and must be witnessed by any election agents present. The verified original V11 forms are then handed over to the WEO for his or her final inspection and verification. After all forms have been completed to the satisfaction of the ward elections officer, the presiding officer can be released so that he or she can be on his or her way back home. Before leaving, the presiding officer and any election agents that accompanied him or her must hand over their badges to the ward elections officer, who will place it in envelope B with the other electoral material for that specific polling station. Nonetheless, please note that in the case of any unforeseen issues, the presiding officer should keep his or her mobile phone charged and switched on in case there is an urgent need to contact him or her.
with so much electoral material being handed over, how will the ward elections officer manage the secure transportation of these goods?
That is a very good point that you raised there. Both the ward elections officer and the deputy ward elections officer will ensure the secure transportation of the electoral material and results of the constituency elections office. If need be, then the WEO may instruct one or more of the clerks to remain behind so as to assist with the transporting of electoral materials. The ward elections officer and his or her team must be accompanied by at least 2 police officers or even more, as may be necessary to ensure the secure transportation of all electoral materials to the constituency command center.
Can you now tell us what happens the day after elections?
On the day after elections, the presiding officers, as well as the ward elections officers and the DWEOs, must report to the constituency command center to assist with decamping and for debriefing. Any electoral material that could not be transported on election night, such as tents, must be collected and taken to the constituency command center. The relevant presiding officer must arrange this to take place through the logistics offices located at the constituency command center.
Okay, let's go back for a moment. You stressed the point where the WEO's team receiving the original V11 forms. If there is a delay in receiving these original V11 forms, can the WEO complete the V23A ward collation form by obtaining the results over the phone or from a fax machine?
If the ward elections officer does not have the original V11 forms in his or her possession, then under no circumstances is the WEO allowed to complete that entry for their polling station return on the ward collation form.
So when is the V23A form considered to be complete?
Using a reference, the original V11 form for a particular polling station, the ward elections officer will capture the results of every polling station within his or her ward. Each such original V11 form must be attached to the rear of the V23A form that will later on be handed over to the constituency elections officer. After the results of every polling station in that ward have been captured, only then are the polling station entries on the V23A form deemed to be complete. The totals must thereafter be summed up and double-checked. Once that is done, all that remains is for the ward elections officer and the relevant stakeholders to sign the V23A form. The V23A form is now complete and has been duly signed. The Form V23A is complete when it contains all the results for all the polling stations in that ward. The relevant stakeholders, that's if they are present, must be requested to sign the completed V23A form. Remember that at the back of every V23A form, one original V11 form must be attached for each and every polling station within that ward. It is a serious violation of the prescribed results aggregation procedures if an original V11 form is found to be missing for any of the captured polling station entries on the V23A form. Take note that the ward elections officer will at that stage also have received all the electoral material and sealed ballot boxes for each and every polling station in that ward.
What happens after the V23A form has been completed by the ward elections officer?
The ward elections officer will display the signed and completed V23A form outside of the ward collation center. In the case of harmonized elections, as there are 3 simultaneous elections, it follows that 3 separate V23A forms will be completed and signed, one for each election. However, there are slight differences. Only in the case of the V23A form for the local councillor election will the ward elections officer announce the winner of that local councillor election. Afterwards, the original V23A forms for the presidential, National Assembly and ward elections, along with all of their attached original V11 forms, should be placed in appropriately marked envelopes. These envelopes, as well as all the ballot boxes, envelopes and other electoral material, will now be transported to the Constituency Command Center. The ward elections officer must personally ensure the secure transportation of all electoral material and equipment, both used and unused, to his or her Constituency Command Center. During transportation of these goods from the ward collation center, the ward elections officer must be accompanied all the way by his or her deputy and at least 2 police officers. If the quantity of goods is substantial, the ward elections officer should request additional security during the transportation process.